Welcome to the Healthy, Wealthy, and Smart podcast. Each week, we interview the best and brightest in physical therapy, wellness, and entrepreneurship. We give you cutting-edge information you need to live your best life, healthy, wealthy, and smart. The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and should not be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here's your host, Dr. Karen Litzy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Net Health. So if you're interested in a free opportunity to check in with the latest thoughts of other rehab leaders, I've got a great one for you. Net Health has a new online rehab therapy community designed for the intersection of clinical and business sides of rehab, and it's called the Rehab Therapy Operational Best Practices Forums. It's all about habits and initiatives that juice up your attendance, revenue, workflows, documentation, compliance, efficiency, and engagement. I know it's a lot, while allowing your provider teams to keep their eyes on the prize, your patients and your outcomes. So I personally believe that a better connected rehab therapy profession has the power to help more people. So jump in, subscribe, it's free, so join the conversations today. You can find the Rehab Therapy Operational Best Practices Forum at www.nethealth.com/healthy. Now on today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dan Mills. Dan is a physical therapist who is currently serving on the board of directors of the American Physical Therapy Association. He is the owner of Performance Rehab Clinics, a multi-site PT-owned outpatient PT business in Salt Lake City. His practice focus is general orthopedics and occupational medicine. He is passionate about triathlons, skiing, fly fishing, and family. And he just completed his 10th humanitarian trip to Africa and his 3rd full Ironman. And what are we talking about today? His humanitarian work, and humanitarian work in general in the world of physical therapy. So we talk about how he became involved in humanitarian work and how you might be able to do the same, characteristics to look for in humanitarian work and in organizations, how to make a lasting impressions in the communities that you serve, meaning how can you make the work you do sustainable, and considerations before engaging in philanthropy. So I want to thank Dan so much. This was recorded live in the exhibit hall at the private practice section meeting a few weeks ago at the Broadmoor in Colorado. So I want to thank the private practice section for allowing us to do this, and I also want to thank Net Health for allowing us to do this live in the photo booth. That's FOTO, not PHOTO. In the exhibit hall. So I didn't really edit anything, so you still get that live feel. Yes, there's people behind us and things like that, but it gives you the idea that, you're there, you're with us. We had some great questions because we had an audience. So a huge thanks to Dan and to all of the people who stuck around in our audience and asked some really great questions. And everyone, enjoy. And again, this is all about humanitarian work. We thought December would be a great time to air this because we've got the holidays upon us, and it's a great time to reflect on what you have and how you can give to others. So thanks to Dan, and of course, thanks to Net Health. Enjoy. Okay, Dan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. First time. So can you give the listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do and why you're here at PPS?
My name's Dan Mills. I'm a member of the board of directors for the APTA as of June, and formerly on the PPS board for about 9 years. And I'm a private practitioner in Salt Lake City, Utah, Cottonwood Heights, which is right at the base of the ski resorts. And I've been practicing for about 20 years. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about some of the humanitarian work that I've done.
Yeah, so today, in about a couple of hours, Dan is part of a panel on humanitarian work in physical therapy. And so we're going to cover that today in the podcast. So first question is, how did you get involved with humanitarian work?
So I think probably in the late 90s, I'd had the impression that at some point I wanted to do something to kind of give back. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I knew that I would recognize it when the opportunity presented itself. So I started out just trying to be receptive and aware of opportunities as they came about. And the first opportunity came with a friend of mine who'd engaged me to help teach at the physician assistant program. I was helping to teach some of the lectures on orthopedic evaluation to the physician assistants at the University of Utah. And the faculty member that had brought me in was putting together a group of students to go to the country of Ghana in West Africa. And she said, "You want to tag along with a couple of the other faculty members?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And what they were doing is they were putting on a conference for all the physician assistants in the country of Ghana. And the students from the University of Utah and the faculty members were going to provide a lot of the speaking. And I thought that was a great opportunity as a PT to engage in kind of a different healthcare profession. And it was a great interaction. But in the midst of that, one of the things that I was asked to do was to get some lab coats that could be donated for a white coat ceremony for one of the little programs that's been fostered by the university for some time. So I reached out to a local faith-based charity to see if I could get them to donate them. And long story short, it didn't work out exactly the way I planned, but the person that I made contact with didn't tell me exactly what she did, but had gone to some effort to try to help me. She reached out later on and said, "I'm involved with wheelchairs for this organization." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." So it was a little physical therapy related indirectly, and I said, "Well, that's great." And then she contacted me probably a month later and said, "I'd like to have you come into a group meeting." And I thought, well, I'd researched a little bit what they were doing, and I told her on the phone, I said, "I don't know if me engaging much more would be necessarily a good thing." And she said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well," I said, "I respect what you do." But what they were doing is they would take shipping containers of wheelchairs and then just distribute them to whoever showed up. And they were hospital transport chairs, so sling seats, and that's not my primary area as an outpatient orthopedic therapist, but I knew enough to represent our profession to say, that's not very responsible, and it could be done a lot better. And she said, "That doesn't change anything. I really want you to be involved." And so I said, "Well, okay, I'm probably going to speak my mind." And she said, "I would welcome that." And she addressed all my concerns, and as I involved myself with this meeting, I didn't realize she was putting together an advisory committee of people to be involved with this at a pretty high level. And I was the only physical therapist that was included in the conversation. She had 50 people in the room, one PT. And so I felt a little bit of a professional responsibility that if they're going to do this at a high level, even though I didn't feel like I was the most qualified PT, to try to engage and support what they're doing. And that turned into helping this organization partner with two different wheelchair providers in the developing world. One of them was called Motivation UK, that provides both a three-wheeled chair and a four-wheeled chair that's completely designed with bike parts and a frame and a structure that's really built to be used in kind of off-road situations, but can be repaired locally in any developing country. So that was an intriguing partnership. And then another one was out of San Francisco State University. There's a guy, this little guy in this laboratory that's hidden away at San Francisco State University. And it was serendipitous how we kind of got connected with this guy. And I'd encourage the organization, you should partner with two. The business side of me is like, listen, you need to contract with two people and not just have one. So the short version of what happened from there was that they partnered with both of these organizations, and this faith-based organization had really significant financial resources to devote to this. And I said, if you really want to do this right, what you should be doing is recognize that every wheelchair user deserves the right to be examined and fitted by a physical therapist. And I didn't realize at the time that I said it fairly strongly, but she took that moment as a tipping point for them and a pivot point where she committed their organization that they're going to teach physical therapists how to do evaluations. And she's not a PT and she didn't know what that looked like, but she was willing to make the commitment to do that. And that resulted in the organization UK giving us 900 pages of curriculum related to teaching somebody that doesn't have a lot of background in wheelchairs everything they need to know about how to fit a wheelchair in the developing world. and it was amazing stuff. The British are thorough in my experience, and so it was lengthy and huge, and I said, we've got to get that curriculum. And so in exchange for buying a lot of chairs from this organization, they gave us curriculum. And then the process was, I took it from 900 pages down to something that was a little more usable and user-friendly. And then they had physical therapists who would go out and teach this curriculum and would send a shipping container of wheelchairs with the curriculum. And that's what they've done today. And they've now provided, I think, close to 600,000 wheelchairs around the world. And I think they're the second largest provider of wheelchairs behind the ICRC, the International Red Cross.
That's amazing. And how long ago was that? How long have you been, how many years has it been?
The first conversations after the University of Utah were in about 2007. And so it's been some time, and that, there's a lot that's happened in that time period. But the really salient points were, I waited for the right opportunity, and they're willing to work with the fact that I had patients to see. I had other responsibilities with the association, so I could kind of pick it up and set it down. And I wasn't looking to be paid for my efforts. I haven't been paid a nickel, but they would pay my way to go. There's a nice little side point, because they started doing so many wheelchairs. The World Health Organization became aware of what they were doing, and also USAID, which is the humanitarian arm of the U.S. federal government. And the WHO, if people don't know, the WHO is actually the health and policy side of the United Nations. So it's really a policy-making body primarily. But they started working with Motivation UK, kind of in a bubble a little bit, and the UK version of that 900-page training involved 3 months of boots on the ground, because in the UK you take a holiday, and you would take, as a therapist, as a physio, you would take a 3-month holiday and go to India to go teach people how to fit wheelchairs. I couldn't ask US-based therapists to do that, so I came up with a 5-day version of that. Well, the World Health Organization, working with Motivation, came up with their version of a 5-day of that, and they approached our organization about that and said, would you guys adopt this? And it was a little funny because, I was the primary editor, taking that 900 pages and 3 months down to 5 days, and it had typos, and I'm not an editor by experience by a long shot, and the stuff the WHO presented to us was basically my stuff, including some of my typos. And so it was flattering, and they were really worried that we weren't going to adopt it, because at that point they had become such a large player. It was really critical for the progression for them to adopt it, and for us to adopt it. So we adopted it, and so now it's the World Health Organization's basic wheelchair provision process, and I'm really proud of that, because that first interaction, asking for lab coats, resulted in WHO policy changes that have now affected what the standard is around the world for basic wheelchair provision in every country.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's such a great way to look at how to scale your humanitarian work. And now we're talking about developing world, humanitarian work in the developing world. But is there not humanitarian work that needs to happen in the United States as well? And are there ways for people to get involved, whether it be internationally or locally?
And on that note, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, Net Health. And when we come back, you'll get the answer to that question and a lot more. So stay tuned. Are you interested in a free opportunity to check in with the latest thoughts of other rehab leaders? Well, I've got one for you. There's a new online rehab therapy community designed for the intersection of the clinical and business sides of rehab. It's the Rehab Therapy Operational Best Practices Forum. Catchy name, right? It's all about habits and initiatives that juice up your attendance, revenue, workflows, documentation, compliance, efficiency, and engagement, while allowing your provider teams to keep their eye on the prize, their patients and outcomes. I personally believe that a better connected rehab therapy profession has the power to help more people. Jump in, subscribe, and join the conversation today. You can find the Rehab Therapy Operational Best Practices Forum at www.nethealth.com/healthy.
Yeah, I think as you're trying to find projects that you could be involved with, there are a couple of characteristics. And this advice was given to me before I even found the University of Utah opportunity. First of all, you have to find a fixable problem, something that's simple and that you can kind of wrap your brain around. One of the problems in the developing world, and I think we find this in our communities too, when you start going down the rabbit hole of searching out problems and you're really honest with yourself about trying to see what you can do, you find 100 things that are wrong. And there's a temptation to try to solve all of them simultaneously. And that typically doesn't work. So the first step is to find one fixable problem. The second thing is that you've got to find a local champion, somebody that's boots on the ground in the area that you can hold accountable, that is going to respond to you and is passionate about whatever it is that you're trying to do. And if you can find a fixable problem and then you can find a champion, the last thing is to make sure that you can quantify and measure the results so that you can be able to communicate to stakeholders whether what you did mattered or not. In that context, there are things being done by physical therapists in every community across the United States. And I think whether you're doing it under the guise of your organization or just as a solo practitioner, I think it doesn't have to be, I'm gonna put together a clinic in an area that doesn't have service. Sometimes it's just donating a little bit of time. It may be something that's maybe outside and away from physical therapy a little bit too. Sometimes we think that it has to be, I'm going to go to Ghana and I'm going to treat patients. Unfortunately, that violates the first rule of do no harm. The last thing that I found that people need in the developing world is more Western therapists that come in and provide treatment for like 5 days and then are going to walk away. I have to admit that I've gotten stronger about this as I've been more involved in more countries, that those countries maybe are better off if we don't come in those cases. That what we need to do is teach people how to fish and not keep going and handing out fish. I have to admit, I'm still conflicted about taking wheelchairs into these countries because the real value I believe I bring is teaching them this basic wheelchair provision, providing education, and integrating it into the PT education programs in these countries. So I think in your local community, it may be finding a pro bono clinic. It may be getting a group of therapists or partnering with a local school, a local PT school, and finding out what they'd like to do. Definitely. I've learned that students are incredibly passionate about this kind of work, but we have to find a way to reframe it so it's not always medical tourism. That it's becoming more and more of a problem, and the way that I had an experience in Sierra Leone, and I was talking to the leadership of WCPT about this in a call probably a month ago, and it's a real concern as people just kind of blow in and blow out, and trying to find ways to make it more sustainable and finding out what they need rather than us trying to impose our Western view of what they need is a really, really difficult thing. You have to be a little circumspect about that.
Yeah, great advice. Now, we have a couple of people here, so does anyone have any questions? Okay, I'm going to just pass it over to you. And just say who... Yeah, you say who you are and where you work and the name of your practice, and then ask the question.
Oh gosh. Thank you, Karen. This is Erica Mello, private practice owner in New York City, Velocity Physiotherapy. Dan, I've been interested in humanitarian work for quite some time. As a newbie to this part of physical therapy, what do you recommend that I do as a first step?
Great question.
That's a terrific question, Erica. Finding out what people are doing in the space. I mean, one of the things that we'll cover in this session in another hour is just what different people are doing. And you have to kind of figure out what works for your personality. If it's almost like your side hustle and humanitarian work. And we talk a lot about that where, when your side hustle turns into a private practice. That's a common story here at PPS for how people started a great business. But that's really how it started for me, was being willing and then looking for the right opportunity. And it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. It started out with just, teaching and interacting with some colleagues that were passionate about humanitarian work and jumping in on that University of Utah project was a great thing. So I would say probably the first one is to find somebody that's already doing it and see if you can jump on and see how it goes. And there's a scenario where if this other stuff with this other organization hadn't worked out, I probably would have gone on and off with the University of Utah to help teach at that conference in Ghana for years. And but that finding somebody who you can kind of hitch your wagon to. Physical therapists are well liked. We tend to be pretty decent in front of people. We're fun, and we travel well for the most part. So a physical therapist on a team that hasn't had a physical therapist on it before usually ends up being a value add, even if they've never considered having a physical therapist. So poking around a little, finding different organizations that are doing that. I'm amazed the number of people that are doing some form of this, whether it's through a professional association or through a group of friends or a practice or a faith-based organization or a civic organization. There are lots of different flavors, and you just got to figure out what it looks like for you.
Nice. Does anybody else have a question? No? I know you do. I know you have one.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Warrick. I'm a physical therapist in Connecticut at Physical Therapy and Sports Medicine Centers. Dan, you had mentioned how you've gone all over the world and you've implemented some of these wheelchair policies within different countries. What is your recommendation to people when they come back home to ensure that that continues? Because you did talk about medical tourism. That's something that I think is even very common for students in PT school. They go on a mission trip for a week, they come back, and not much can continue after they leave. So what's your recommendation for keeping track of how it's progressing and making your impact permanent?
So that's a great question, Stephanie. The challenge is trying to provide some accountability, but also I think at a basic level, becoming a colleague to the people that you're supporting. So if you're helping to train other practitioners, the ability to say, let's keep in touch. And you have to be careful that way, because sometimes in the developing world, there are problems that we're not facing here. So it's not unusual that you may get an ask for, hey, I'd love for you to sponsor me I'm considered immigrating, or, we really could use this, that, or the other. And sometimes you have to be a little selective in terms of what you're willing to provide. But at the very least, communicating them about professional issues and becoming a colleague at the most basic level, you can continue that long after you're gone. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, as you're partnering with organizations, making sure that you get to the level of like a Ministry of Health or a high-functioning hospital. And in the developing world, typically a high-functioning hospital is being propped up by an NGO, a non-government organization, and sometimes multiple NGOs. And it's very hard on the outside to tell this, but you need to find out how well run is it and how financially solvent it is. And if it's financially strong enough, the ability to continue to, for a school to continue to support that organization is typically higher. And frankly, they'll look for ways to, after you've been there once, to get you back there. I mean, even under a different guise. The ability, I've heard of PT students going back 3 years later just by themselves to go teach at the whatever school and to, or teach at the whatever hospital, and they welcome that. It's surprising how few people take advantage of the fact that you just offer. Just say, listen, I could come and speak for a couple days on any topic that you want. Here's 10 things that I could speak on, and they may pick 2 or 3 of those and provide some in-service. So it's really important to try not to be a one and done, so that it becomes a little less voyeuristic. And it's hard to break that perception. Especially if you go to a country that's a fun country to visit. In sub-Saharan Africa, like Kenya, for example, everybody wants to go to Kenya because they want to, go do something good and then go see the animals afterwards. But they don't want to go to Togo, which is run by a total despot, and they've killed all the animals off there, and there's lots of infighting and there's tribalism, and it's not pretty, and it's a developing country. but that's a country that needs a lot more attention, for example. So you have to pick where you're going to go, and not based on TripAdvisor reviews where you want to take your next vacation. So,
what do you mean you can't just go there and do safari and forget about the humanitarian work? So I have one last question, and that is there a downside? I know we talked about, aside from the sort of medical tourism, but is there a downside to the clinician to doing humanitarian work?
I would say you have to be careful. It takes some balance in your life, your professional life, to make sure that you're not overextending yourself. I think as PTs, we typically have the Peace Corps gene in spades, and so, you have to make sure you keep the home fires burning. So don't let your side hustle, if your side hustle's never going to make you money, you need to be able to feed yourself. So make sure you don't sacrifice too much. And there are times and seasons. I mean, if you've got in terms of the life cycle of your clinical life or your practice life, that it's taking more of your time, or you're doing an advanced degree or an advanced certification, that may not be the perfect time to do this. But it's always a good time to start poking around and thinking about it. This is a little embarrassing, but in 1996, Bono, the lead singer for U2, did this.
We don't even need the.
I don't know what the generational range is.
Madonna,
that's right.
The singer. We got it.
For our generation, it's shorthand, for sure. So Bono did this article in Time magazine that I read about what he was doing in Africa, and in hindsight, what he was doing was pretty irresponsible. But at the time, it really, really affected me. And I said to myself, "There's no way I can do anything right now." But it's stuck in my head. At some point, when I have the time and the resources, I'm going to do it. And so make the commitment to yourself, collect the articles, develop the thoughts, talk to people, and then wait for the right time. Because if the time's not right, that's the biggest pitfall, is bad timing. Don't be scared if the first foray in kind of crashes and burns, or you find out something's not quite the way you'd like it to be. The pitfalls can be, partnering with the wrong organization, and you learn as you go. And if typically as organizations and volunteer opportunities evolve, it shouldn't look the same way this year that it did last year. It should be growing and evolving.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for this talk. This was great. Where can people find more about you and some of the work that you're doing? Is there a website, or what's the best way to find out about this stuff?
The stuff that we're doing today, there are any number of people that in our association that are doing work. I know that there's a special interest group through APTA that's starting conversations about this. Most of the educational institutions are trying to find some version of doing mission work as some type of an elective. But I would just encourage people to start with just the cocktail conversations, and just start with that as a great place to learn what's being done in your community. And then, there's so many solvable problems out there. There's a lot of good to be done, and there's no limit to what you can do to make a difference.
Awesome. And on that, I think is a perfect way to end. So thank you so much for taking the time out here at, I almost said CSM, at PPS here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And thanks to Photo for letting us use their booth to record this. So Dan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And a big thank you again to our sponsor for today's episode, Net Health. So again, they have a great new online initiative. It's free. Anyone, if you're a rehab professional, definitely join. It is called the Rehab Therapy Operational Best Practices Forum. And you can see stats on the community members already involved, plus some new polls just launched that we'd love for you to weigh in. What you can expect that will benefit you, write-ups, white papers from leading-edge performers, and there are polls, surveys, benchmarking calculators, videos, podcasts, and more. So if you want to be part of a great online community of other healthcare professionals that has the power to help more people, then jump in and subscribe. You can find the Rehab Therapy Operational Best Practices Forum at www.nethealth.com/healthy.
Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to the podcast at podcast.healthywealthysmart.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media.